Hey guys, it's Treasure here from Nikki and Mallory with another leather goods project for you. Today we'll be working on a satchel using the stitch in gusset technique. Now I'm not sure if that's an actual term for this particular design, but that is the term that I'm giving it because if you look at the design closely, it fits the name perfectly. So that's what we are rolling with today. Of course, I have to start out making my pattern piece, which I am making here from scratch. This bag uses one piece entirely, excluding the pocket and the gussets. So because it is one piece, we have to make sure our measurements are on point. Of course, I'll be showing you how to make this bag from beginning to end, but our main focus of this design is how to stitch in the gussets. So yeah, if this is a technique that you've been interested in learning, you've seen this design before and never knew how it was constructed, continue watching. So the leather that we are working with today is the holster leather Weaver Select in a London tan. Now this is my first time working with this leather, so I am doing a bit of experimenting. When it comes to hand stitching bags, I like to work with leather that is of a thicker ounce. I usually stick between 5 to 6 ounce for my hand stitch bags. However, because this is a one-piece bag, I need the bag to hold its own weight, and I don't like flimsy bags. I especially don't like flimsy flaps. So this leather weight turned out to be perfect. It is a 6 to 7 ounce. The texture is beautiful. The color is beautiful. I'm a creature of habit and I usually stick with the same types of leathers in hand stitching my bags, but I'm glad that I was able to try this one out. It is absolutely perfect, especially when it came to cutting my pieces. I felt like all the pieces could stand on their own, which is good. Granted, some of the pieces are fairly thick and I will need to skive them down, but I'd rather be able to skive them down than to not have a thick enough leather. So if you've been curious about this leather, give it a try. I love it and I think you'll love it too. When it comes to working with gussets in general, they can be a little tricky. Sometimes they can be off. Sometimes there's not enough stitch holes. Sometimes it's too short. There's so many different things that happen when working with gussets. However, I feel like in doing the stitch in gusset, it always seems to come out a little more accurate than all other gussets. There is a science to it. There is a lot of trial and error that typically happens before you get your gussets to accurately fit your bag, but it is all worth it. I have figured it out as a bag maker. It has taken a lot of trial and error, but I still feel like the stitching gusset is the most accurate. For this design, I actually extended the stitching length, so I gave it maybe 3 to 4 more extra holes, but that was really a design preference. So because this leather is kind of thick, these side panels that are going to be attached to the gusset, you want to make sure that they are skived down as much as possible because you will need some flexibility in going around the actual gusset itself. This technique I really love when it comes to bag making because it just makes it so much easier to drop the gusset in versus having to take your whole entire gusset and turn it at the edge as you're stitching. This just gives it a cleaner look. So since I have both of my pieces skived down, I'm going to actually apply them to my perimeter with some double-sided tape and take this over to the sewing machine. This is the only portion of the bag that I am machine stitching. Everything else will be hand stitched. Before I pop over to the sewing machine, I want to make sure all of my hand stitching is somewhat out of the way. These two pieces will be the last thing that I'll punch holes in, but we are adding a back pocket to our bag. So I've already marked out where the bottom portion of my bag will be, and as we fold it this way, I know the perimeter of my gusset area. So what I need to do now is take my pocket, measure out exactly where I need that to start, and where I want that to end. I wanted the pocket to extend to the bottom portion of the bag down here, just to give it some weight. So essentially it'll be stitched somewhat in the center of the bottom portion of the bag. I know this all sounds crazy, but it'll make sense once we do it. And I'm going to stitch everything going up here. So now that my pocket has the chisel punches, you know I don't like to leave anything raw. If you've been keeping up with any of my designs, I don't like raw edges. So I'm gonna go ahead and burnish and smooth out these edges before I attach it to the bag. Of course, I still have to do my bag chisels. But yeah, I'm gonna work on these edges before I attach anything. As far as this piece that is attaching to our side panel, I would recommend measuring out your stitch line before sewing this piece onto your side panel. And of course you want your stitch line to be the exact same width from the edge as your bag. So just go ahead and measure that out. Make sure that it's the exact same. Add your stitch line. Not just add your stitch line, but add your stitch line and your chisel holes, because once it's sewn onto the side panel, it will be a little difficult to punch your holes. Which also means just make sure your stitch line starts exactly where you know you want to start stitching the gusset to the bag. And if you need to measure that up with your bag, just to be a little more accurate, to know where that first stitch hole will be, do that before you start punching out all your holes. Now you can do this all the way to the end, and it won't matter if you have excess holes or not to cut off. As long as that first stitch is even, everything else will even out accordingly. When it comes to prepping the gusset area, the one technique that I have learned, actually I learned this in fashion design school, was of course to measure out the piece that is going around the gusset first. But as you notice, when you get to the corners, things aren't as even as you would like them to be. So because we are working with leather and we will be turning this piece, we don't want any type of weird puckering around the corners. So for that, I'm going to start out placing the gusset down with my double-sided tape. However, when I get to the corners, I want that to be really, really even. So a couple things you can use. You can use your nippers. If you have a notcher, this is from fashion design school, so a lot of you probably have never even seen this. If you have a notcher, this would be great. or you can just use your scissors. I'm not gonna use my nippers. I changed my mind. I'm gonna use my notcher, and I'm gonna give myself some notches, which is going to pierce my leather. As you can see, I'm gonna do a couple pierces. That way, as I start to go around, it'll give me that leeway that I need to stretch the leather out perfectly. Instead of it being a weird pucker and you trying to bend it in place, that's too much. We don't have time for that. So yeah, the notcher or scissors or your nippers, you just want to cut some little gashes in the leather and move that around. So I didn't add any notches along this corner just to show you the difference and what type of ease it gives you once you do add your notches. So in cutting out these pieces to sew to the side panel, I always do them a little extra longer just because as you start to twist and turn your edges, you never know how that's going to end up at the top. So I just make sure that it's a little longer, and after you sew it on, you will need to cut off that little piece. You want to make sure that cut is nice and clean, which is why I don't use scissors. A rotary cutter or a leather knife would be perfect. Cut that off. And now you have your gusset piece. So this gusset piece is ready to go, has my stitching holes and now my hardware holes. So I'm just going to apply the hardware and finish out the rest of the bag. So now that all of my pieces are done as far as the gusset hardware, I'm now going to work on the flap attachment. So I've decided to go with a contrasting leather, which I think will be way nicer as far as the style of the bag. And this will be the lock clasp hook. I think that's what it's called. That'll go on the front portion of the bag. I'm even going to edge coat this little piece because why? It makes a huge difference. I don't like raw edges. Now look at that. That looks so much better than this raw edge. Like what? What is that? So just in case you happen to be that curious George or Georgette and you're wondering why I'm not using a saddle, I have been making bags for a really long time and it is my preferred method to not use a saddle. A saddle, it gets in the way for me, especially when I'm making bigger bags like this. When I'm working with wallets, belts, smaller pieces, a saddle is great, but when I'm working on bigger projects, don't bring a saddle anywhere near me. Before stitching the gusset to the bag, you just want to loosen up the stiffness of the leather. So as you are starting to stitch around the perimeter, all the holes match up and it's not as tightly fit. So just loosen that up, give it some flexibility, give it some movement, and then go ahead and stitch it to your bag. And there you have it. Our bag is complete using the stitch in gusset method. I don't even know if that's the name of it, but that's the name that I'm giving it. Works out perfectly for my bags every single time. I really love the look. It gives it a nice touch of quality in addition to edge coating the gusset when it's stitched to the bag. Please don't forget that, because leaving those edges raw, it just makes the bag look completely unfinished to me. Preference, it is all preference. I prefer to edge coat. Some people prefer not to. To each his own. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this project. I really had fun making this bag. It is pretty time consuming to hand stitch an entire bag, but the quality of hand stitching is like no other. It definitely beats machine stitched any day. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something from this and hope you get the opportunity to try out this technique. I will catch you on the next project.